You mentioned that engineer that said, "Oh no, it's all rubbish." But I've had a few engineers ring me up and say, "Yeah, yeah, right on it." So it's illogical to say, "Oh, Max was." People have said Max was only winning because he was the greatest driver on earth and he could win it. I've never said that. Every racing driver needs a great car, and it's always 60-40 car driver. I can't think of any driver in the history of the sport remotely near Lewis when it comes to being motivated to the level he is with the experience and the success that he's had. How much did Lando put on the line yesterday, setting fastest lap on the last lap of the race on a 44 lap old set of hard tyres, and he went quicker than Lewis or George had gone on new softs? I mean, that shows how much 1 point means to Lando Norris and how well he's driving at the moment and how good that car is. I was there on the Saturday night when Gilles Villeneuve said to me and Carlos Reutemann, "Nah, I'm going to let Jody win this race because Jody's promised to help me win the championship next year." And Carlos looked at him and said, "Gilles, you do not play around with points. You have no way to understand what next year will happen. You must fight for every point now. If you have chance in championship, you must take it."
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me, as always, is friend of the channel, one of the go-toest F1 minds to have ever F1'd, my friend and yours, Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, mate. Yeah, a bit shattered after the weekend and, well, just general traveling. We had the opening of the exhibition last week as well in London, which went extremely well. Capacity crowds going just gangbusters over there. But then, yeah, all happening again, all bursting back into life. So much for the great August break. Don't know what that was all about. Blink and you missed it. But anyway, here we are. Monza next weekend. Never stops. And then the Acropolis Rally. Wow.
Oof. There's lots going on there, Mr.
Yeah.
Windsor. No rest for the wicked and all that. Should we talk about some F1age? This weekend was techie, as some say. What do you think was the biggest story to come out from the Dutch Grand Prix, in your opinion?
Well, obviously that on a par and with Max in front, so he's on the pole again, if you like, the way Lando dominated the Red Bull and Max, that combination on Max's home circuit, on a track which kind of should neutralize any real pros or cons of any of the top cars. The McLaren made the Red Bull look fairly pedestrian. And that is impressive, isn't it? I mean, so we've got a championship now. As I've said all along, the nearer we get to the end of 2025 with no regulation changes and with all these top teams continuing to push, by the law of averages, even Mercedes and Ferrari should get it right pretty soon. You'd hope for 2025 anyway. And I think Red Bull have just sort of hit a barrier and that's it. And yes, of course they've got resources, and of course they can look at areas where maybe they can improve the car. But overall, right now, in terms of from where they've come and to where they are right now, McLaren have definitely got a better car in terms of sweet spot, looking after the tires, speed on the straight versus downforce, control of bouncing. Just they're right on it, and it's great to see. And Red Bull kind of at a loss at the moment as to what to do about that. Thinking it's got a whole bunch of second places. Can we still win the championship? I guess that's probably what they're thinking now, getting their calculators out.
Oof, unbelievable. Let's talk about the perceived drop-off in performance from Red Bull, because there's been a lot said over the past couple of weeks over the summer break. You tweeted about the potential speculation, conjecture around this asymmetric braking, torque steer, inertia valve, the use of a fiddle brake, an effective fiddle brake per what McLaren were using back in the day. To which a Red Bull employee, an existing one, responded, "That's absolute nonsense. It's bull feathers." Peter, do you think that this could play a part in the perceived drop-off in Red Bull performance since, say, China, Miami, or will we never know?
Well, regarding the response from a Red Bull engineer, I mean, they're hardly likely to say, "Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. We're in big trouble now. I mean, give me a break." What are they going to say? So that's that. I think, I mean, there are two things here. One is the distinct drop off in terms of consistency and getting the car to work through all stages of the weekend, which Red Bull have always done very well over the last, what is it, 2 years, 2.5 years. And suddenly in Miami, it fell away. So there was something weird that went on between China and Miami. And it was also interesting that the FIA clarified the wording, or added another sentence to the wording of the rule around this whole asymmetric braking thing going into the August break. And the word on the street, which street you talk to is another matter, of course, from where you're coming from. But the word on the street is that, yes, there was a valve that was totally legal within the regulations, that was being used, that was actuated according to inertia as you go into the corner. And that would help your braking either left or right as you went in. And if that's the case, and if Red Bull were doing that, full marks to them, great job. They're never going to admit that, I wouldn't have thought, if it's now off the car, or indeed if it's still on the car in some other form. But it looks like if that was the case, and they did have to take it off before Miami, everything that's happened since then kind of fits into place, doesn't it? And you can't relate Red Bull's so-called drop-off to what other teams may or may not have been doing in the midfield or even around them. The only thing you can relate it to is how Red Bull have performed over a weekend in terms of adapting to all the variables, the changing conditions, the different tire compounds in the race and everything else. And ever since Miami onwards, it's always been a bit of an issue. I mean, if you look at Max, for example, at Silverstone, hopeless in the first part of the race, very good in the back half of the race, last third of the race. And that's a car that's suddenly in sort of Mercedes territory of not really understanding where we're going with tire temperatures and the sweet spot of the car, but magically finding it. And that's what's going on in Mercedes all the time. George, 1 minute has amazing grip, the next lap has no grip at all. It's always been the same, it seems. But McLaren aren't there, and they've focused on other things, I would guess, and they've managed to get a car which has really good downforce versus top speed and minimal bouncing and a nice big sweet spot in which to operate with all the variables in place. So looking at all the evidence and hearing what is being suggested, it struck me that that is probably what has been going on. And again, I don't think, as I said in the video last night, I don't think we're ever going to know possibly until the end of the year, maybe even longer if it really did happen. And if there was nothing illegal, but it was advised that they take it off or modify it before Miami, we're never going to know that. But to me, it does fit the puzzle, and it looks to be a logical thing. And interestingly, you mentioned that engineer that said, "Oh no, it's all rubbish." But I've had a few engineers ring me up and say, "Yeah, right on it." So there you go.
Wow. For whatever it's worth, Peter, that's I find it feels a little bit coincidental, and I completely concur with you, Peter, that we'll never know definitively, right? But particularly around the handling of the car, Max always these days, particularly at Hungary, seems to be complaining about turning. If I remember rightly verbatim, his complaint at Hungary was, "I'm -5 on brake bias, and this effing thing still won't bloody turn." There's a picture of him on the onboard yesterday with Max literally hacking at the steering, trying to get it turned in. And this isn't to say definitively that there was a fiddle brake or a torque steer thing in play, but I agree with you, Peter. Something's
and I
happened.
And if you've got that system, and who knows, maybe it was on the car last year as well. Maybe the 20 is the embodiment of that system, and it's kind of designed around it a little bit more. And if you take it off, the 20 is more exposed than maybe the 19 would have been. And that's another point. And I think you also need to look at the way Sergio Perez has been struggling with the car. And if you think about the way he was in trouble under braking in Melbourne in the wet, Saturday morning, I think it was. He went off twice or something like that. That to me would fit in as well, because Max was using it well and doing what he does and just sloping into the corner, extending the straight a bit, even in the wet. Very nice feel for the pedal and release of brake pedal pressure. And he was getting the effect of the inertia even in the wet. Whereas Sergio, when it's wet, tends even more to just brake in a straight line, get the car stopped, and then rely on his innate talent, which is a huge talent, from mid-corner to exit, where he's just looking for the power at exactly the right moment and gets it on at the right moment. But he was suddenly struggling to get the thing stopped at any sort of braking marker. And that would suggest that he wasn't igniting the brakes in any way because he wasn't generating enough inertia going in. That maybe that's simplistic, but quite often very complicated looking things in Formula One turn out to have an unbelievably simple explanation.
Yeah, blimey, Peter.
The only other thing I would say, and uh, and it's an interesting point, is the very, very odd brake problem that Charles Leclerc encountered in the early laps of the Bahrain Grand Prix when he had weird temperatures left to right. Now, I assumed, like everybody else, that that was the front brakes, but if Ferrari had been running a similar system, would they out and on the radio, would they say publicly, it's the rear brakes, our system's gone haywire? Who knows? Maybe they weren't running it. Maybe it was just a genuine imbalance. Maybe it was a Brembo thing that they weren't getting right. Who knows? But that's an interesting thing as well. I mean, it's a very unusual situation to have temperatures varying like that to that extent in the way Charles did. And maybe they're running a similar thing. Who knows?
Oh, it's all cloaks and daggers in the weird and wacky world of F1, Mr. Windsor. Whilst we're on the subject topic of Red Bull, Christian Horner said something post race that I found interesting, and again in the broader context of how the competitive landscape will play out between now and the end of the season, as far as both the constructors and the drivers' championship. He talked about the car that they need to go away and try to understand what's going on with it, what the deficiencies are and how to fix for them. And Peter, that struck me that the team principle of a team who have been super dominant over the past 24 months, he's not talking about lead time necessarily around the upgrades. It's not that they know and are trying, it's that they don't even understand yet what the problem is and was at the Dutch Grand Prix. Does that concern you as far as Red Bull, Peter?
Well, the comments don't concern me because they're completely logical. I mean, you don't need to ask Christian Horner to know that's the case anyway. Obviously, if they knew what the problem was, they would have fixed it and they would have had a better car. And equally, if he was to say, "No, we're not worried. The car's really good. We'll be fine in the next race," it would be ludicrous. So he's got to say what he said, and know that's completely logical. But whoever asked him those questions was wasting their time because they didn't need to be asked anyway. We all knew it. Um, and it comes back to the old Ron Toronac thing. It's much more difficult to know when you're winning what you're doing right than it is to know what you're doing wrong when you're losing. And that's, of course, the problem Red Bull now have. They've been winning for so long. It's kind of a shock and difficult for them to know what part of the car to be looking at, what part of the underside to be looking at, probably more accurately. And that's the thing. If you're coming from behind, you can measure over a period of time where you're losing, what's going wrong. But if you've been at the front, it's quite difficult to keep on top of things in terms of, are you doing this as well as it should be done? And I totally agree with him. And it's a logical point that it's difficult to know where to start because the car has been so good in the past, and it is still very good. It's not as if we're talking about a car that's dropped from the front of the grid to the midfield. He was on the front row, for Pete's sake. So, it wasn't a slow car, and he was leading the Dutch Grand Prix, more to the point.
Yeah.
But then, it came down to tires, didn't it? And it came down to very poor use of tires, even though Max was very, very good, and he was on tiptoes, really trying to look after those mediums off the line, and then the hards. And he was going, if you look at what he was doing on the hard tire first 5 laps compared with, say, George Russell, you can see how pussyfooting Max was with his driving, but it didn't do any good. They just never got him into the zone at all.
It's interesting, Peter. I get what you're saying. Going back to the Christian Horner question, I agree with you, but it feels like Red Bull have been eating too many lunches at the Mercedes motorhome, right? As far as their trajectory, the design philosophy of the car, they're almost doing this random walk iteration that Mercedes were doing earlier on in the season, right?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, it'll be interesting from here on in. I think this is where we need to see how good or not they are. Their building blocks are much more solid than Mercedes were, because Mercedes were in trouble from the minute the 2022 regulations came into play, and they had no background to it. They had no understanding, and that's why it's taken them this long, and they still haven't got there to try to get it right. Red Bull, for what I've just said, they do have foundation blocks from which they can generate these questions. So is it this part of the car? Is it ride? Is it ride height? Is it the rear floor? Is it the front floor? Is it the stiffness? Whatever it is, there's about 10 areas probably they could be looking at. But all of those areas have very precise and solid building blocks, and they will give pretty quick answers. Whereas Mercedes, even today, looking at all those 10 areas, the ground's a bit soggy, it's a little bit, flexible, and yeah, well, it worked there, didn't work here. They've got much less of a database so far as the 2022 regulations are concerned from which to build.
Yeah, no, don't disagree with you there, Mr. Windsor. Go on then, let's talk about Max Verstappen very quickly, because many people have taken the Dutch Grand Prix conveniently as a rod to use on Max Verstappen's back. Naysayers, like fervent, ardent Lewis Hamilton fans, will say, listen, I told you already, Cameron, that Max Verstappen is a fast car, an Adrian Newey car merchant, that now he doesn't have the fiddle brake and he doesn't have the car underneath him. He's getting gapped by Lando Norris to the tune of 22 seconds, and that this somehow undermines some of his qualifying performance, the God tier lap that I thought he put in at Austria. To that, Mr. Windsor, you say what?
Well, from my part, I've never said that Max doesn't need a quick car underneath him in order to win races. So that sort of argument I don't even think about, because it's illogical to say, oh, people have said Max was only winning because he was the greatest driver on earth and he could win it. I've never said that. Every racing driver needs a great car, and it's always 60-40 car driver. I think Max drove really well at the weekend. And I think from the moment he knew that his tires were going off, and Lando was not going away, and his tires therefore were not going off, he knew then that the race was for second place. And at the pit stop, put the hard tires on, and he would have felt straight away, this is P2. I just need to beat whoever it's going to be, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, and that's it. And I thought he drove very well. You can't expect any more from a driver of quality in that situation. And he could have thrown it off the road. He could have done a million things. He could have destroyed the tires and lost P2 even. But I'm not sitting here saying I'm a massive Max Verstappen fan above all drivers. I just think objectively, the guy did a very good job yesterday in a damaging, race for them. It was a damage limitation race, and they had to get as many points as they could out of it, and they didn't get it right. And I, as I said before, Zandvoort is a weird circuit. There aren't a lot of corners there that you would call Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton corners. They're all, and there aren't many corners anyway. And there's a lot of corners which are just flat or line locked, like the bank corners. And if the car isn't giving you the grip and feel that you need, there's nothing you can do about it. Other circuits, Spa, possibly, yeah, Spa for sure, Baku, Monza, maybe you can do a little bit more if you're a Max, but not around Zandvoort. What's he going to do that Lando Norris can't do around there? And if Lando's got a better car, bye bye.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. You spoke about damage limitation, Peter. 70 points is the difference between Messrs Norris and Verstappen, with 9 races remaining. Have we got ourselves a drivers' championship proper?
Oh yeah, we got a drivers' championship. We got a constructors' championship too. I mean, you can see Max maybe winning the drivers' championship just, but you can certainly see McLaren winning the constructors' championship now. And if Max has a few DNFs, you can see Lando winning the drivers' championship. No question about that. We definitely have a championship, and even more, it brings that Hungarian Grand Prix into focus, I think, because how much did Lando put on the line yesterday, setting fastest lap on the last lap of the race on a 44 lap old set of hard tires, and he went quicker than Lewis or George had gone on new softs. I mean, that shows how much 1 point means to Lando Norris and how well he's driving at the moment and how good that car is. But more than anything, it shows how much he needs those points. And if you think now, you put that 1 point he got for fastest lap and the risk he took, actually, bearing in mind he had it was 18 seconds at that point over Max, and all he needed to do was enjoy the last lap, even wave to the crowd if he wanted to, and cruise across the line. He didn't. He went out for that extra point, and that, to me, come back to Hungary, massive mistake by McLaren to take those points away from him the way they did.
Wow, it could be telling. Imagine he loses the championship by less than 7 points,
Well, I
Peter.
did say that at the time. You don't play around with points, and the reason a lot of people have said to me, "Wow, you were fired up that night, Peter. Wow, why were you so worked up about it?" And well, the reason I was worked up, and I suppose with the passage of time, you don't keep tally of how many people were there at this particular event or that particular event, and you just assume everybody lives the same life as you do. I do anyway. And I was at Monza in 1979. And I was there on the Saturday night when Gilles Villeneuve said to me and Carlos Reutemann, "Nah, I'm going to let Jody win this race because Jody's promised to help me win the championship next year." And Carlos looked at him and said, "Gilles, you do not play around with points. You have no way to understand what next year will happen. You must fight for every point now. If you have chance in championship, you must take it. Do not play around." And Jill said, "Nah, Jody's a good bloke. I trust him. And I know Ferrari will give us a great car." As it turned out, 1980 was a disaster for Ferrari. Gilles had no chance of winning the championship in 1980. Jody was unbelievably slow anyway that year. And he gave the championship to Jody in 79 at Monza. And I always thought that is the turning point of really how to win a world championship. And and this may sound arrogant, but if people out there don't know of that conversation and don't know that that took place, then they shouldn't be in Formula One making decisions, because that was the turning point of how we should judge the importance of points. And everything I said in Hungary came from that incident at Monza 79 with Gilles Villeneuve. And I feel very strongly about it. I can't imagine what McLaren were thinking pre-race, agreeing and presumably just sort of getting a nod from the drivers that that's what they would do if an undercut had come into play and by chance the other driver got in front. I mean, there's so many factors that come into play in that situation. Apart from the best driver for McLaren, as far as the championship is concerned, quite plainly is Lando Norris. So why would you take points away from him anyway? Anyway, I've said that again, and I just think in the context of the championship, it was interesting how much store Lando put on that fastest lap yesterday.
Peter, can I push back on you? I
Yeah.
think McLaren might have made a good play in retrospect. Here's what I think's going to happen. I don't think Lando Norris. It's possible mathematically that Lando could win all of the remaining 9 races, and then plus the sprint races, and take every single fastest lap. But I think that's not the most probable of outcomes. Here's what I think Lando needs to happen if he's going to have genuine aspirations of winning the championship. Now more than ever, he needs for Oscar to take points away from Max. Lando needs to finish first, and he needs for his mate Oscar Jack to finish in second. Otherwise, I think it's almost not beyond the realms of possibility, but an outside chance that he wins. So I think that Hungarian decision, whilst at face value it might look like a wrong one for McLaren, but if you disenchant Oscar at this stage, knowing that you need him to finish second ahead of Max, if indeed you want to win yourself a drivers' championship in 2024, I think McLaren might have been quite cute in that sense.
I can't agree with you there, Cameron, because, well, for 2 reasons. I think everything I'm talking about in terms of we have a championship is on the basis that you can never assume that your opponent is going to finish every race. And Max Verstappen, as I said, he could have a string. He could have 4 DNFs. Tell me how the championship's going to look then if Lando happens to finish first or second in those 4 races. Seriously, that could happen. So that's the first point. Secondly, if Oscar, annoyed that Lando had won the Hungarian Grand Prix, is lying second in the Italian Grand Prix, and Max Verstappen is behind him, you honestly think he's going to slow down and let Max pass him just because he's feeling miffed about Hungary? Of course not. Oscar's going to try and get the best race result he can possibly get, regardless of what happened or didn't happen in Hungary. So I don't agree with that. I think the only thing they were saying to Lando was that if in the future this year we're in a similar situation and Oscar just happens to be in front because we brought you in early to do the, to cover whoever, to cover Max, and it's just happened that way. If you don't do it in Hungary, we'll let Oscar stay in front. That's all they're saying in that same situation. And the odds of that happening are pretty small, let's face it. And even if they did, my money's on Lando to do something about it anyway. And you could tell when he was out there on the track in Hungary, Lando was in seriously more than 2 minds. It was like 2/3 of a mind. just to ignore the order and keep going, because he knew how important that was.
Yeah.
And, as I say, you've only got to have Max fail to finish 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden, those points are going to become really, really important.
Wow. Wow. You're getting me excited for the season, Mister.
Well,
This
I
is
don't know
going
about
to
excited. I mean, it's a bit
be.
worrying, really, isn't it? But yeah, I suppose excited is okay if you just want a close championship.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, on McLaren,
Yeah.
and Lando more broadly. Lando has made mistakes, Peter. I think Lando should have more than one race victory to his name this season. And again, he's talked ad infinitum about the bad starts, the software glitch in Spain that he experienced when shifting from first to second. Now at Dutch Grand Prix, the chat is that, well, he said himself that he'd dialed in too much revs and there's too much wheel spin, and that's what led to the poor start. Does Lando have the minerals? Is he as good a driver? He's plenty quick and his racecraft is very good, but there's always been questions about his mental fortitude, constantly down talking himself, and Lando's a glass half empty type person and driver. Does he have what it takes, Peter, to take it to Max Verstappen over the next 9 races? Or are there things that he needs to improve if he harbours aspirations of winning a championship in 24?
Well, you use the word racecraft, and although I think his racecraft is very good, I'm not convinced now that it's very good when he's racing with Oscar Piastri, and we saw that in Spa. The reason he went wide out of the first hairpin at Spa was because Piastri was inside him, and that was a legacy of what happened in Hungary. As I keep saying, that was a huge event in terms of Lando's 2024 World Championship. So that is something we should bear in mind as the season goes forward. If Oscar Piastri is in the inside or outside of Lando Norris anywhere, Lando isn't going to be as decisive and as cool as he normally is against a Max Verstappen or a George Russell. And that's something that McLaren have created now, and they need to do something about that. It didn't arise in Zandvoort for obvious reasons, because Oscar wasn't very good at Zandvoort. But in general, it's something could easily happen again, and they need to be on top of that. And here's a question. I know I haven't fully answered the other one, but here's a question. If Oscar's alongside Lando, say on the front row at Monza, do you think that Zach Brown will be saying to them on the Saturday night, this is Lando's season from here on in, Oscar, you're going to have to drive to help him, and I don't want to see you alongside him going into braking in turn 1. I want to see you giving him a lot of room if he's just in front. Is he going to have that conversation with Oscar Piastri? I don't know. Difficult one. Anyway, getting back to your point, I think his track craft is good. I think it's very good, actually, and I think his issues off the line. I mean, I went in detail yesterday. I went through all the data, and he does definitely have wheel spin. You can see he's feathering the throttle in first, compared with Max. But his initial launch was slightly better than Max's. I'm not talking about reaction time here. I'm talking about the way he actually got the car moving. Up to a certain point, he was going quicker. And I think, if I was at the McLaren team, I'd be telling him not to worry about the starts and just get on with it. And he'll have some good starts coming up. Not the more you think about it, it's a bit like putting and getting the yips. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. You just got to go in, eye it up, and go for it, and just relax, and he'll be fine. So I have total respect for Lando as a racing driver in every dimension, actually. And I think a lot of people say he's got a weird, I don't know what they say about his personality. A couple of people have sent in the various WhatsApp, Lando this. To me, he's just a really cool guy that's very relaxed and very, very sharp in terms of what it takes to put a race car together and what he needs to do well in the race. And yeah, he was very good in terms of calling strategy. I like the way he talks now with his engineer, and they seem to be on the right sort of level. So I don't have any problem with him. If it's Lando against Max, I would say it's going to be pretty close in terms of mano a mano, and that he's had enough bad starts now. You'll probably see some jackrabbit starts from him coming up.
Not before time as well, Peter, because if you go back, I think it's been 6 races where he started pole and not ended the first lap in first. Going back to Sochi 21, Brazil 23, Shanghai
Yeah,
this
yeah,
year.
yeah. But it's the statisticians like you or whoever gave you those stats that Lando needs not to listen to, because you'd never get out of bed if you start looking at those sorts of stats. You can come up with stats to prove any point or not. Yeah, he's had a few glitches off the line. Yeah, he had a bit too much wheel spin at Zandvoort. But, bottom line is, it didn't hurt him, really, did it? And reality is, being in the DRS on full tanks at Zandvoort, it obviously didn't hurt his tires at all. It was actually probably quite good for him in terms of fuel saving and various other bits and bobs, and just staying in the slipstream of Max. It was an argument to do that. It's so easy to pass at the end of the straight there if you're in the DRS in the right place. So it didn't hurt him at all, did it?
Yeah, fair. Talk to me about the mental aspect of Formula One, Peter, because again, the knock on Lando for many has been that he's very endearing in the extent to which he's very self-deprecating, always talking about, yeah, it's my mistake. I haven't been good enough, he said, over the summer break to challenge for a world championship, that I've got to be better. That if I'm gonna race, Max, I've got to step my levels up.
I think that's a really, really healthy attitude, and it's such
Okay.
a change to see that. Very refreshing, and it's that's the reason he's getting better and getting better all the time, and he can take this pressure because he is constantly learning and questioning, and that's a very good thing. I mean, I've said that about Piastri as well, that he's pretty self-critical. They both are, and in Oscar's case, he's working hard at short corners and spent enough time behind Charles Leclerc. Again, he did at Monaco practice, and now Zandvoort. He knows how Charles drives, but didn't do him any good, actually. And he didn't actually get the best from the car in Q3, did he? And looking like the bits they had to change overnight, that he seemed to have damaged the floor slightly, or parts under the car. And he needs to get on top of that, because he just needs to perfect the short corners thing, and he needs to do more time in that area. That's where he's going. That's where he's going to beat Lando for sure. But at the moment, it's sort of one step forward, two backwards, it seems, with Oscar. Or maybe it's two forward, one backwards. I think.
Yeah. Do we not need to give Oscar some grace, this being only his sophomore season? I think it's almost that great expectations of the chap, and the fact that he's even close to Lando Norris in his second season, now fighting for a Constructors' Championship. Do we not need to...
No, he's been in there long enough. He's been in there long enough, if he's the next Jackie Stewart or Ayrton Senna, to be the next Jackie Stewart or Ayrton Senna. And look what they were doing in their first season. So that's the benchmark. It's not Lando Norris, because he was brought in to replace the Grand Prix winning Daniel Ricciardo. So, he needs to be the next Ayrton Senna, if that's what everybody thinks he is.
Wow.
And at the moment, if that was Ayrton in that car, you'd think he wouldn't be quite as inconsistent as Oscar is. I don't really want to criticize Oscar, because I think he's driven really well. And like you, I think, wow, he's still a relative rookie, I suppose. But the bottom line is, if you look at all the circumstances surrounding him going to McLaren, and he's not even a number two, he's an equal number one, if you like. There's every reason for him to be out there every race right on Lando. And I'm still a bit shocked. I mean, if you think about the takeaways from the Dutch Grand Prix, that domination by Lando is one. The other one for me was how relatively poor Oscar Piastri was on a circuit like that. You'd imagine he would have been either on the pole stroke 1/10 away from Lando, and would have been easy P2, and should have passed Charles Leclerc, should have beaten Charles Leclerc in that race, and he didn't. And I'm a bit confused by that. Well, not confused. I just think A, Lando was brilliant, and B, Oscar was a bit disappointing, is the way to look at it, I suppose.
Yeah, don't disagree. Speaking of performance and variances pre and post the summer break, there was chatter on the internationally syndicated broadcast that one Checo Perez has gone away, come back. It looks a little bit more refreshed, a little bit more match fit. They said that the rumour is that he's done some driver coaching at Silverstone. Again, Mr. Windsor, I remember in a not too distant past, we had a conversation, and I said to you, what would you do if you were Christian Horner as far as Checo Perez? And I think you mentioned something to the effect of driver coaching. What do you make of that rumour?
Well, I make of it that if it's true, then obviously they watch the show, and that's a good thing. And they've realized that they need to get Checo back with Rob Wilson and do some work with him. And I hope that has happened, because he could definitely benefit from a polish from Rob. He did a few days with him in his Force India days. Or was it Racing Point then? I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, for sure, he's become a little bit edgy going into corners, and the balance and the platform he needs in order to do what he does really well, the exits, as I keep saying, has gone away for whatever reason. Either too much money in the bank, or taking it for granted, or the car's been quite difficult since Miami. One of those three, probably all three combined. And Rob is definitely the right guy to, if any driver's got that sort of problem, he's definitely the right guy to be on top of steering rates of load and brake pedal pressure application and release against steering, and balancing the car prior to the transition point of the corner, and giving the driver a platform that allows him to be, for the car to be more calm and not to ask as much from the car, and not to be driving on reflex going into the corner. And Rob is definitely the best guy I know on the planet Earth to create that for a driver. And I hope that's happened with Checo. I'm if Checo has finally got his finger out and watched our YouTube channel and decided that he needs to go back to Rob, then full marks to him, because there's a lot of ego in Formula One, a lot of drivers out there who think that they can't be told how to drive, and even the engineers go along with that. But Rob very rarely does days with Formula One drivers without the engineer coming along and sitting in the back seat and getting shorthand notes of what they're talking about and what the weak points are, and coming up with catchwords to use during the weekend, the race weekend, which will remind the driver of what he needs to do in terms of steering and brake pedal and other rates of input. And that's, any good race engineer will be doing that these days with Rob. And that's a very good thing, and he goes from strength to strength. I mean, Cam Waters, very good Aussie V8 drivers, done a lot of work with Rob. There he is, right at the front of Aussie V8s now. Linus Lundqvist isn't exactly going backwards in IndyCar with his career at the moment. Very, very classic Rob Wilson driver. And if it's right about Perez, then good luck to them. Stroll still does quite a lot of stuff with Rob, I'm sure. So yeah, really good to see if that's what he is doing, unlike a lot of drivers who would just spend time in the gym, go cycling and jet skiing or whatever they do. And good for Checo if he's been out there getting his hands dirty.
And the rumor on Checo Perez's future, and again, I think he's to be commended absolutely 100% for his approach, and that's in stark contrast to many F1 drivers, like you say, Peter, who wouldn't even consider humbling themselves and taking advice from somebody else. I think Checo Perez's performance is best characterised by, I think I'd give him a B+. I think it's progress. He just didn't need to, it was cap and collar right. He didn't need a DNF. He didn't need to do anything messy. He kind of needed to get his feet back in underneath the F1 table and just progress going forward.
I mean, from his point of view, it was a shame that he got beaten by Sainz. But then again, as you say, at least he brought the thing home, and it was a difficult car, as Max obviously showed. And back half of the race, I know Max was just making sure that he kept the gap to Leclerc around 6.5 seconds, and he was driving accordingly. But in terms of lap time, Perez was right there in the back half of the race on the hard tire, and it was, it was okay. I think he needed to get a race like that under his belt in order to move forward now from where he is. He was kind of getting a little bit better, but kept dropping it, and he did all right. He did all right at Zandvoort. I think, the other confusing thing for most people is that, unlike other sports, you could say, where coaches are involved directly with the athlete, in racing, it's the race engineers and the whole performance team around the driver. And of course, that's not the case. As Rob's often pointed out, it's the gaps between the digits of the telemetry that he's working on when he's sitting next to a driver. And the engineers totally get that. Well, the good ones do anyway. And that's why they come along and watch and listen, because they're getting information that they would never, ever get in a million years from telemetry. And that's why the coaching role is still absolutely critical. The problem is to crack this sort of ridiculously barnacled shell in which all the drivers now live, get rid of it, so they do understand that it is an athletic sport, and what the engineers tell you or what your physio tells you isn't necessarily all you need to know.
Speaking of driver silly season, the rumour around, in fact, let's talk about Logan Sargent first. How do you I don't want to kick a man when he's down, Peter, but it is Logan's time up now in F1.
It's a difficult question to answer as directly as you've posed it, because for me, the real question is why Williams have managed him so badly and not got more from him, because I think he's actually quite quick, Logan Sargent. I don't think he's Alex Albon quick, but I don't think he's more than a tenth or two away. And they don't seem to have got any sort of consistency or confidence out of him at all. And so for me, the big question mark is, are the Williams management capable of getting the best from any driver,
Wow.
including Alex, and of course in the future, Carlos Sainz? And that's a big question mark for me. And and it must be very disconcerting to be in Logan's position where you're paying for the drive, big money, but basically your career has generated. It's not as if it's just sort of a benefactor coming in from nowhere. It's because he's done a very good job in the feeder formula. He's got this money. It's gone to Williams. And who was it that was kicked out of the car when Alex Albon crashed in Melbourne? And so that was a bad thing. And that although at the time I said I'm shocked that he would even be at the racetrack after that and stay around for the weekend. Everybody else sort of brushed it off, and next race, oh, there's Logan back in the car. I think that sort of thing stays with you. And then, I don't know. There's something about Williams, isn't there? It's kind of weird, the things that go on there, and that illegality thing now with Alex Albon. It must be a very uncomfortable situation to be Logan Sargent right now in that team. And if I was Williams, I would say, here's an American. He's done well in terms of putting finance together. He's not slow. He's definitely quicker than Nicholas Latifi, the Canadian. And we need to look at ourselves as to why we haven't got more from Logan Sargent. Yeah, he did a day with Rob. Should we have done a lot more days with Rob? Should we have handled him differently? Rather than just chopping and changing and moving around, they should look at themselves, I think, see why they haven't got the best from him. And it's very easy to look at results and say, oh, well, he's not this, he's not that. But there have been occasions when Logan Sargent has not been slow. Absolutely no question about that, if you look closely at the lap times in various situations over any given race weekend. That's the first point. My next point is, there are far too many good young drivers around who deserve an opportunity. I mean, Marcus Armstrong, who was absolute neck and neck with Liam Lawson in terms of their careers going up in New Zealand, two very quick New Zealand drivers. Who talks about Marcus Armstrong now? He's out there doing a really good job in IndyCar, but nobody talks about him. It's all Liam Lawson now. He's the man of the moment. Nothing against Liam at all, but there are plenty of Liam Lawsons around and plenty of good drivers around, and we need to create, as I keep saying, we need to create a B division world championship below Formula One for the Marcus Armstrongs, for the Liam Lawsons, for the Logan Sargents, and they should be in current Grand Prix team cars from a year ago or 2 years ago, and they should be racing on different circuits. Should be a complete championship in its own right, and it's within the scope of Liberty to create that championship, and that's what we need, instead of all this talent being wasted and these shots of drivers with headsets on in the garage. As I've said before, it's absolutely heartbreaking to see a guy like Drugovic in the Aston Martin garage with a headset on, not behind the wheel of a racing car. It's completely ridiculous. No other sport would be this disorganized, to be honest, when it comes to its new talent. So that needs to happen. And as now, I'm not sure that Logan Sargent's days are over. I think he's quite a quick driver, and I'd like to see. I hope he continues in Formula One in some form. Difficult to see how it's going to happen now, but I guess there's so many closed doors now out there.
Yeah, he'll do well. I know that James Vowles says he wants to support him in his endeavours to remain a professional racing driver, but I don't know how they can.
But what does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
He's not supporting him because he's sacking him. I don't see how that works.
Yeah.
What does that mean? He's going to be in the Williams are going to create this B division championship now, Mega, and they're going to race 14 Bs or something. I don't know. Wouldn't it be good?
Isn't the B division championship that you speak of though, Peter, F2? I mean, if F2 championships weren't banned from competing.
Because in F2, if you win the championship, you can't race again. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's nonsense.
No, it needs to be a proper championship with Teo Pourchaire in there. All these guys should be able to go out and create. We should have complete mini Formula One teams, part of the thing, a bit like the academy, I suppose, but different, all self-funding and different championship. different TV rights. The whole thing should be completely different, and you get young drivers a seat when they come out of Formula 2. Definitely the way to go.
Yeah, it's not going to happen though, is it, Peter?
Well, that's
This is Formula One. Like, manage your
well, is it Formula
expectations.
One? I don't know. I think it's also why we don't have Andretti on the grid. It's all these current teams too greedy and wanting to make sure their cake stays as large, the slice of the cake stays as large as it is. And they don't want 13 teams for a start. But that would help things along if we had 13 teams. Putting aside Windsor's idea of the B Division Championship, if we
Yeah.
had 13 Grand Prix teams, we'd have a few more seats for the Mick Schumachers and the Felipe Drugoviches, and that would be a good thing, and the Logan Sargents even. But that isn't going to happen. Even if they weren't going to do it for Andretti, they're not going to do it for anybody, are they?
Let me pick your brain on that, Peter, because I read an interesting article last week that talked about the potential downside of having not necessarily Andretti, but a team that came in like Toyota did so many moons ago, and didn't do the F1 project as it's supposed to be done, right? Line of least resistance, base your HQ in Middle England, etc., etc., and ultimately threw a lot of good money after bad. This article suggested that if, let's hypothesize for a second, if Andretti did come in and they did do a Toyota, that as far as growth markets and expanding into North America, that a loser story in Formula One would be really, really bad for Formula One going forward. And that's why they're doing the risk averse thing and saying, oh, no, Andretti Global, you can't come in because there's more upside to you from joining than there is for us to have you as part of this F1 project. What do you make of that thesis, Peter? Because it's a bit...
Well, complete and utter nonsense from beginning to end, because we've got enough teams at the moment that make Formula One look bad. I mean, fancy, I keep going on about it, but I mean, Williams going to the Australian Grand Prix without a spare chassis. I don't think Andretti would do that.
Yeah.
So that's the first point. Whoever makes that whole argument hasn't got a clue. The reality is that it is about money, and it is about not wanting to have other teams come in to take your share of the cake. And I totally disagree that Toyota brought Formula One into disrepute. They were a great team. They brought great sponsors into the sport. They did a lot for drivers. It was very well managed by John Howard. It was a privilege to have the world's largest car company in Formula One. And I have nothing but fond memories of everything Toyota did. Yeah, I can remember standing in front of the Toyota motorhome with Ron Dennis at Magny-Cours one year, and Ron saying, "Oh, this is a disgrace. Look at the way they've finished the awning there. It's all cut wrongly and this and that." And I remember looking at him thinking, can you get a life, please, Ron? These guys, this is Toyota. We should all be out there welcoming them to Formula One and celebrating their presence in Formula One. Instead of which, most people, did take the Ron Dennis, Bernie Ecclestone attitude of, sooner they're out, the better. And arrogantly stupid attitude, in my opinion. I think they did a great job. I really enjoyed Toyota. Yeah, they didn't win a Grand Prix, but I was in Japan when they were racing in Japan, and the fans absolutely loved them. The presentation was excellent. Engineers were really good. The wind tunnel they did was fabulous. I loved everything about the Toyota Formula One team. I love watching them, and I love the cars. And so, all this sort of cliquey hashtag nonsense about it brought Formula One into disrepute. I mean, what are we talking about here? What sort of Christian would say that? I just don't get it. Sorry.
Yeah, fair. But I do think there's something to be said for everybody loves a win. I was watching loads of documentaries over the weekend in my trying to fill gaps in the F1 summer break, and there is something to be said about glory supporting right, Peter. That everybody loves a winner. Even for their indiscretions, I don't know if you're looking fighting and boxing, there are a gazillion douchebags outside of the ring, but just because they win and go undefeated, everybody forgets and forgives all of the, I don't know, domestic abuse, whatever the case is. And so I say that to say this in Formula One.
I don't buy that.
You don't think so?
If that was the case, Sir Sterling Moss wouldn't be celebrated because he never won the World Championship. I don't get it. Formula One is about drivers and people. And generally speaking, Toyota always had really interesting drivers, whether it be Alan McNish, Mika Sala, Jarno Trulli, even Ralf Schumacher, and there was some really cool guys in the Toyotas, and it was a great team. They did things differently. They thought differently. And And as for winning, as I say, in that case, Sterling Moss, please explain.
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter. I just think in 2024,
Yeah, but
again,
forget about
yeah,
2024. The
yeah, I agree
reality
with you.
is, yeah, but it's not about 2024. If we only think of the present and we disregard the past, we then don't think about the future. And the future is important, but you can't have the future without the past and the present. We wouldn't be where we are today unless it was what happened yesterday. And the argument that you mentioned was one along the lines of, oh, we don't want to go down the road of Toyota, who brought the sport into disrepute because they never won races, and maybe that's why we don't want Andretti. It's complete and utter nonsense. If Andretti come into Formula One and do half as well as Toyota, I personally be really impressed and very happy.
Yeah, I
And
do.
and Andretti needs to come in. Every team has a different aura and a different feel for why it exists. And if Andretti comes into Formula One, it's partly because of Mario Andretti and everything Mario has done in Formula One. It doesn't matter if they're back of the grid or not in the first 2 or 3 years of their life. Who cares? It's the Andretti Formula One team representing the Andretti family and the United States. What's bigger and better than that? What's more fun than that? And anyway, if a team's not winning, make lots of good documentary Netflix
Mm,
stuff about it, because and I know that the stories behind trying to get a team to the front are just as compelling, if not more so, than being with the team when it's dominating all the races and winning everything. I mean, right now, you're telling me it wouldn't be great TV to be in the discussion room, the meeting room at Red Bull and Milton Keynes right now as they're analysing the Dutch Grand Prix and what went wrong?
mm,
You don't think that would have many viewers? I mean,
yeah,
that all that stuff, it's just, it's brainless clickbait type journalism. I'm sorry, I have no time for it, because understanding why Toyota didn't win races is just as compelling and as enjoyable as what they were doing anyway.
mm,
It doesn't matter that they didn't win races. They did a really good job. They left because basically Formula One kicked them out and made life so difficult for them. They thought, well, we just don't need this. They obviously don't want us. So we'll get out of here. We'll go rallying again, or sports cars or whatever. Sports cars, wasn't it?
yeah,
So, endurance. So they got out and did a very good job in that instead. But had they been given more of a welcome in Formula One, they'd probably still be around. A bit like Michelin as well, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah. Fair.
So
It.
Formula One needs to be very careful about its sort of secondhand car dealer gangster approach to blue chip companies, because we need them and we can't treat them with disrespect. And Toyota's role, they played their role beautifully, I think. And I think Andretti would do the same. I have no doubt about that.
Uh,
Audi are coming in. We need to be the same with Audi. Maybe Audi will be terrible in the first couple of years, but it's Audi. Give them some grace and give them some respect. Don't just say, oh, they're slower than Williams in race one. It's all nonsense. As I say, it's just poor journalistic clickbait stuff.
yeah, I don't disagree with you, Peter. Like I think
Good.
for us, but we've been around this. But I mean, you've been around the sport
Mm.
many, many years. I've been watching all my life, right, 40 years. But I think under the guise of trying to, if you're going to be super ruthless about growing the sport, like into like taking it to the next level, we've had Drive to Survivation, we've had 2021 as a season, and COVID did wonders for Formula One,
Hmm.
because for a while it was the only sport that was on television. But if you're going to be super ruthless and efficient about taking the next step, then you would love for a team, Andretti, Lucky, whoever, you would love for a team to come in and absolutely nail it right, be straight right up there with a Red Bull or a Mercedes. I think if you could guarantee Liberty Media that they would welcome in any team. But I think the hesitance, absolutely, there is meritocracy and bureaucracy wrapped up in that. We all know that characterises, has and always will characterise F1. You can't split F1 from that. But I think Liberty Media, I get the point, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, Peter, that Liberty Media and the teams might be a little hesitant and circle the wagons around this castle that they've built, for fear that Andretti Global will come in and do and not necessarily not detract from it, but not contribute to the house that they've built proportionately as much as I understand it with my business accounting cap on.
I just don't get that, because that would imply that all the teams in Formula One at the moment are all running at the front and they're all
True,
brilliant. I mean, a
true.
lot of them are shoddy and poorly run and with a
You're right.
lot of errors in them. So I just don't get that argument.
You're right.
Andretti may be poorly run in the future and it may have a lot of errors in the way it's executed. I doubt it, but it might. But it isn't a reason not to have them in. They're a competitor. Competitors, that's what racing is all about. And I mean, your argument is that if it was a guarantee that Andretti would be right at the front, everyone would open the gates and allow them in. I mean, A, that's never going to happen. B, it's a sport. And C, as I make the point again, any journalist worth his salt should be able to do a lot with the presence of an Andretti Formula One team, regardless of where they are on the grid. And if they're not at the front of the grid, the story behind the building of the team and how they're going to get to the front of the grid is just as compelling and just as interesting and just as amusing as being on the front of the grid in race one. And we've got all the tools with us now, all the tools production-wise in terms of media coverage to do that. But, I seem to be a lone voice because I still keep saying I've yet to see the Netflix insider story on the engineers rather than the drivers. When's that happening?
Yeah, I'm
Or
with
the
you, Peter.
mechanics. When's that happening? As I keep saying, Formula One is a community. It's not just the drivers. They're obviously the most well known. Okay, well, let's do the job now for the engineers and the team managers, whatever you want to do. And that's not happening either. So there seems to be quite a lot of impasse there. And I can't say any more really, other than that I would love to see Andretti in Formula One. I'd love to see Toyota back in Formula One. And I think Toyota did a very good job when they were in Formula One.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, Peter, but I think we've got to, if we're looking at the demographic holistically, I'm right there with you. I'd love the Drive to Survive series that focuses on the minutiae and engineers and gets very technical. But my wife, Peter, that the demographic that I think F1 and Liberty
you
Media...
misunderstand me. I'm not saying that it delves on the minutiae and is incredibly technical. What it does is take these human beings who happen to be engineers and make them really interesting to your wife and everybody else out there, all the people that were watching the other Netflix. That's my point. Yeah. And they're all just human beings. Of course, you don't go into all the technical detail, part for one reason, the teams won't release it. And two, it's quite boring for most people, but you make them people, you make them, how's Mattia Binotto going to get on in Germany, having lived all his life in Italy? What restaurants does he go to? How's he finding it? What cars he driving? That in itself, if you spend a bit of time with Mattia Binotto, it would be quite interesting to see all that.
Yeah.
And you could make all that stuff. It'd be fascinating, I think. What's Adrian doing? What's going on in his mind? And so on. You could do a lot with engineers. You could do a lot with mechanics. You could do a lot with motorhome people. You could do a lot with sponsorship purveyors or whatever they are, procurers.
I think you're. I think you need paying for this council, Mr. Windsor. You're giving Liberty Media the blueprint.
Somebody needs to pay for all the ideas I'm coming up with. That's for sure. Because the other one, of course, don't forget, is to start building renditions of all our classic circuits in the middle of the Middle East and the Vegas desert. Oh. And I'd love to see that happen too. Nürburgring, Spa, Brands Hatch. I'd like to see those all in the middle of the deserts, please, with lots of runoff area, but exact replicas of the actual Grand Prix circuits. That's my other idea. The B Division Championship, and let's go to the next level of the way we go behind Formula One, and we get to the point where everybody's clamoring to see the Andretti Formula One team, even if it's going to be at the back of the grid for 3 years. We don't care. We want to see it. We want Mario. We want Michael. We want the Stars and Stripes out there, and that's what we need to create. And if people aren't thinking that way, then somebody's not doing their job.
Yeah, you'd love to see it, Mr. Windsor, but sadly, I think it's not the most likely outcome. Bearing in mind, if past his prologue at least.
Well, you're Mr. Good News this morning, aren't
you? too pessimistic, Mr. Windsor. Always.
Yeah, you've either been living in England too long or been watching Formula One for too long, one or the other.
Guilty as charged. As we round third base, Mr. Windsor, you've been super generous with your time as always. Talk to me about Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton in his performance at the Dutch Grand Prix, because there are two schools of thought that I'm hearing. One, that he dropped the ball massively in qualifying and it was just a mean reversion of sorts that we saw in the race proper. And two, that Sir Lewis, he is him and he was absolutely brilliant in the race, coming through the field in a car that wasn't the best, outperforming the car as he does at his best. On which side of that fence, Mr. Windsor, do you sit?
I probably am the fence itself, because I don't think he dropped the ball as I predicted before the Dutch Grand Prix. I think on the Wednesday, or we did something, I don't know, it was the weekend before maybe. I said this wasn't a circuit where a Lewis or a Charles or a Max can do very much. There aren't many interesting corners which you can play around with. And whereas Max and Charles can still live with a knife edgy car on tiptoes and get the absolute maximum from it, even if they can't do what they really want to do with the car. I think Lewis, as I've said before, I think, and it shows up like alongside George, I think Lewis, when he's got corners that he can do things with and he's got grip and balance, he can still do it to the point where he can actually, make George look relatively straightforward. But if it is edgy and the car's got a very small sweet spot and the tire temperatures are changing lap to lap, that's when Lewis, unlike Max and Charles, is not going to back away, but he's not going to push it to the absolute limit, because he's just going to just give it a little bit of margin, and none of his corners there exist really at Zandvoort. So I think that's why when they lost temperatures and they lost grip in qualifying, I don't think it was a Lewis thing. Because George had the same thing, didn't he, in his first run in Q1, I think. So I think at that point, Lewis just sort of backed away slightly. And then if you compound it with all the traffic and the vortex of Q2, you've got, Lewis not getting through to Q3. And I don't read too much into that, other than that it was quite predictable, given that the nature of the circuit is what it is. I think he still drove very well in the race. He beat everybody he should have beaten, really. I don't think he should go too over the top about his drive. From where he was, he did everything he should have done, that most guys would have done from that position in a Merc, I think. He beat all the crowd, didn't he? So that was good. And he got there, and he was not far behind George, but then George had that extra pit stop. So it was about right, but not I shouldn't read, that wasn't a race in which to evaluate the talent of Lewis Hamilton and where he is. It was, it was just a funny race, funny circuit with fairly cold conditions, the hard tires. If you didn't get it absolutely right, you were struggling.
Yeah. You know what? To that point, Peter, what you said there is reminiscent of ex-Mercedes engineer Philip Brandle, who said something to that effect, not quite similar, but not the same, around Lewis Hamilton. We've spoken about this before. His quote was that when Lewis doesn't have the chance of winning himself a race and getting himself 25 points, that he, quote, lets himself go a bit. And again, Sir Lewis Hamilton's fan base all around the world reacted to that with, like, they were not happy.
I don't agree with that. That's not what I was saying. What I was saying was that Zandvoort peculiarly is a circuit which doesn't really have any Lewis Hamilton corners. It's got lots of corners, obviously, and they may be in their own right, quite spectacular if you've got an onboard camera doing this with Lando Norris or low down or whatever it is. But they're not corners where Lewis Hamilton can do anything really very different from a George Russell. And then what is the weekend? The weekend is relatively cold, relatively windy, hard Pirelli tires, short lap, lots of traffic, need the car to be perfect, need the tire warm up to be perfect on the out lap, blah, blah, blah. And so with all those things, I think in that situation, because there's nowhere Lewis can actually get out, and then even if he gets a couple of other things wrong, he can go and do his corner the way he can do it so well, because that doesn't exist. He was kind of at the mercy of all the other stuff going on, and he's still going to be pushing it absolutely as far to the edge as you can, but not at the George Russell edge. And that's, and I say that because George, I think, actually stands closer to the cliff edge probably than any other driver in Grand Prix racing at the moment.
Wow.
And not to say he's about to have an accident or he's out of control. I'm just saying his precision and the margin he leaves is smaller, given the way he drives, that he's not really a manipulative driver in the way Lewis, Max, or Charles are. He's got no margin for error. And I think Lewis has, a 0.001 margin for error, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah, I agree. I've had this conversation with friends, this argument with friends of late about Lewis's, how to characterise Lewis, because for sure nobody would argue that Lewis doesn't become an absolute monster the second that he gets a sniff of either a race victory or a championship. But I think the point of contention is, when is there an equal and opposite downside? Does Lewis dial out when he's not dial out? That's the wrong terminology. But do you lose that 20% that you would gain from Lewis Hamilton becoming a Fangio or Senna when he's got a whiff of a 25?
Well, put it
points?
into context. This was a guy that from 2007 has basically driven pretty good Grand Prix cars, and not every race, but generally speaking, most weekends he's been able to wake up thinking, I've got half a chance of winning this race, even if it's a bad weekend. McLaren and Mercedes. That all changed at the end of 2021, beginning of the 2022 season. And I predicted incorrectly that Lewis would begin to decline, because having won 7 world championships, gone through the pain of Abu Dhabi 21, and now in a car where he's having to outbrake Yuki Tsunoda and Kevin Magnussen into turn 1, he's not going to be the driver that he was in 2007, quite logically, on the basis that most world champions retire after 2 or 3 years, or if you're Nico Rosberg, the day you clinch it. So here's Lewis doing all these brilliant things, despite all the road dust he's got. And 2.5 years on, are we allowed to give him a little bit of slack if he's having to outbrake Kevin Magnussen yet again into turn 1 in the Dutch Grand Prix? I think we can cut him a little bit of slack, but still give him massive thumbs up for still being very highly motivated and doing the job, and bringing the car home just behind George. What more can you want from a guy who's done this much already? I don't say this much for the sport. I just mean who's done this much. Yeah. And I can't think of any driver in the history of the sport remotely near Lewis when it comes to being motivated to the level he is, with the experience and the success that he's had already. It's just astounding. I mean, Michael couldn't reproduce it when he went to Merck. So, nobody should criticize Lewis for his driving at all. The only thing you criticize him for is what was he doing with the whole Perez incident. And that's what I thought you were going to mention. Was he half asleep then or what? I don't know. I mean, maybe that was the radio miscommunication. Maybe that was an example of Lewis, if he's not in the running for the race or the championship, and maybe they said to him, Perez is coming up quickly. Maybe he was 90% focused on where he should position the car. Maybe he wasn't 100% focused. Maybe that was an area where maybe you could say, that wasn't the Lewis of 2007, maybe. I don't know. It was difficult to see all the details of that incident, and looking at his defense, it was along the lines of, I don't know what more I could have done, but he did get the penalty. So
I think they were hard, as they are sometimes, the FIA with Lewis. I think they were a bit harsh, if only because he had to get there was 2 very quick cars coming down the road in quick succession, right? So the only reason why he was out on the outside of turn 9 there is because he not long jumped out the way of somebody else who was oncoming. Yeah. So whilst the FIA, I hear them that he could have braked harder and not been there. He absolutely was on the racing line. It's like, bloody no, as you said, Peter, can't you give this dude some grace sometimes? FIA as the regulatory body.
It's not Lewis Hamilton, rookie in Formula One. He's Lewis Hamilton, 7 times a world championship winner with a massive amount of road dust on him. 100%. And he deserves some respect by anybody that even thinks about criticizing him, to be honest.
Yeah, not least the regulatory body, who at times suffer from a bit of regulatory capture.
You say that. I don't know. It wasn't, as it happened, it wasn't that big a penalty, was it? He wasn't super quick anyway. So,
Yeah, I don't know.
I think they just do it out of precedent, because there are so many grey areas you can rule into every event that happens, that sometimes you just have to go back and say, well, this happened, so therefore the same thing has to happen now. And I think that's what they did. They do that when it's not absolutely clear.
Yeah, maybe they do. Peter, I think the FIA suffer a bad bout of regulatory capture as at August 2.
We'll join the millions of journalists that have been saying that since 1950.
This is the way. These are the FIA cards that we've been dealt, Peter. But with that, sir, you've been an absolute legend. More than generous with your time, as always. If you are watching this and you are not subscribed already to the Peter D. Windsor YouTube channel, then what are you doing with your life? Really? Genuinely? Non-rhetorical question. Go and subscribe to that channel for the best F1 analytics, storytelling, insight on all of the YouTubes. And then shortly thereafter, get yourself over to a podcasting platform. Subscribe to the Short Corners podcast for more of the same. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to give us a like, comment and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, follow and 5 stars, por favor. I'll be grateful ad infinitum. Peter D. Windsor, you've been a legend as always, sir. Thank you so much for the time. I've been Cameron F1 as always. Be sure between now and next time to look but never stare.